By 59, you don't get called into the CEO's office unless something is about to end. Careers, reputations, or the quiet version of life you thought you'd earned by simply lasting long enough. When the message came, no subject line, no explanation, just Laura Bennett wants to see you. Now, I didn't ask questions. Men my age already know the answers we're supposed to give. I stood up from my desk, straightened the jacket I rarely wore anymore, and felt that old, humiliating awareness. When you're nearly 60, every walk down a corporate hallway feels like it could be your last. You're watching this, so let me say it clearly. I wasn't afraid of losing a paycheck. I was afraid of being reduced to a quiet exit, a polite email, a line item labeled legacy adjustment. The hallway outside her office was silent in a way that didn't belong to a Tuesday afternoon. Glass walls, muted keyboards, people suddenly very busy with screens they weren't looking at a minute earlier. Laura Bennett's office sat at the end, all clean angles and winter light off the Chicago River. She was already there, standing by the window, 48 and composed in a way that didn't need to prove anything. No raised voice. No smile meant to soften the moment. She turned when I entered and nodded once toward the chair across from her desk. "Sit down," she said. "We need to talk." That sentence has ended marriages, careers, and friendships. I sat, keeping my hands visible, empty. At my age, even small gestures get misread. She didn't rush. She looked at me the way people do when they're deciding how much truth the room can handle. "This isn't a performance review," she said. That should have helped. It didn't. I'd survived 8 CEOs, 3 restructures, and more slogans about innovation than I could remember. What I hadn't survived yet was being seen as unnecessary. "How long have you worked here, Michael?" 22 years. "And you're 59. She didn't say it like an accusation. She said it like a fact that carried weight whether we liked it or not. Then she asked something no one in corporate America ever asks a man my age. "Do you want to keep working?" I had the prepared answer ready. Loyalty, commitment, flexibility. But I also felt the cost of lying, even politely. This was my first real choice, and it surprised me how clearly I saw it. Protect myself with the right words, or keep my dignity by telling the truth. "I want to work the right way," I said slowly. "And when it's time to leave, I want to leave standing, not faded out." Something shifted. Not sympathy, recognition. She slid a single sheet of paper toward me without pushing it all the way across. "I was hired to modernize," she said. "Reduce friction. Show growth." I didn't touch the paper. "And men like me are friction," I said. "There are opinions," she replied carefully, "about who fits the next phase." I nodded. "When you reach my age, you stop pretending not to understand. My name's on a list." "There are lists," she said. "And conversations." That was when the door opened without knocking. Ethan Cole stepped in like he owned the air. Early 40s. Perfect suit. The kind of friendly expression that never reached his eyes. "Board call got moved up," he said, placing a tablet on her desk. Then he glanced at me. "Everything okay?" It wasn't concern. It was inventory. I could have stood, thanked them both, and walked out clean. That was the safe choice. The quiet one. But Laura looked at me, not asking for help, not warning me, just watching. So I made my second choice. "Laura and I aren't finished," I said evenly. "I'll step out when she says so." For half a second, Ethan's smile cracked. Then it reset. Of course. Just aligning schedules. He left, closing the door gently, like a man confident the building would eventually agree with him. "That," Laura said, "is part of the pressure." "He wants me gone," I said. "He wants a story," she replied. "And the story is that experience costs too much." My chest tightened, not with fear, but anger I hadn't allowed myself in years. "I didn't call you here to fire you," Laura said. Then she added quietly, "But that doesn't mean you're safe." She leaned forward for the first time. "Tomorrow morning, you're in the board prep. Not to defend yourself. To show them what disappears when people like you do. And if I fail? Then you leave the way you asked to," she said. Clean. Honest. No slow humiliation. 22 years. A nearly paid-off house. A grown son watching how I handled the last stretch of my working life. The easy path was to walk away now and call it wisdom. The harder one was to stand in front of people who had already decided what a man of 59 was worth. I looked at her. "You're asking me to risk everything I've built." "I'm asking you not to vanish," she said. Her phone lit up on the desk. "Board call, 5 minutes." She didn't pick it up yet. She held my gaze and said softer, "If we do this wrong, they won't just remove you. They'll make you an example." I stood, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Not comfort, not romance, but resolve with teeth. "I'm in," I said. And as I walked out of her office, I understood the real danger wasn't losing my job. It was letting someone decide, for the last time, who I was allowed to be at 59. The next morning, the office was too quiet for a building that claimed to be moving fast. That kind of quiet only shows up when decisions have already been made somewhere you weren't invited. I arrived early on purpose. At 59, you learn there are moments when being first is the only way not to be last. I set my coffee down in a conference room that smelled faintly of cleaning spray and new carpet, and I told myself something you might recognize. Don't think about what's at stake. Just think about what's right in front of you. The board prep wasn't scheduled for another 40 minutes, but Laura was already there. No jacket this time. Sleeves rolled just enough to look practical, not casual. She was writing on the whiteboard, fast and precise, as if the words needed to exist before doubt could catch them. She didn't look surprised to see me. She glanced at her watch instead. "You're early," she said. "So are you." She capped the marker and finally faced me. The light from the window caught her expression in a way I hadn't seen before, not guarded, not commanding. Focused, but tired. It struck me then that whatever pressure I felt, she was carrying her own version of it, just at a different altitude. "I won't keep you long," she said. "This isn't rehearsal. It's alignment." That word, alignment, usually means compliance. I waited. "They're going to test you," Laura continued. "Not your knowledge. Your posture." "My posture," I repeated. "They want to see if you shrink," she said. "Or if you fight like someone who thinks he belongs." There it was. Not a promise. Not reassurance. Just a clear-eyed assessment of the room I was about to walk into. She handed me a thin folder. No fluff. No branding. Just numbers, timelines, and a few handwritten notes in the margins. "These are the pressure points," she said. "You won't be asked about them directly." "Then why give them to me?" "Because when someone tries to corner you, it helps to know where the walls actually are." I nodded, flipping through the pages. Nothing in there was new to me. That was the point. Experience doesn't shout. It recognizes patterns quietly and waits. We stood there for a moment, the silence doing something unexpected. It leveled us. Not CEO and employee. Two people about to step into a room that enjoyed watching others perform. "Why me?" I asked. Laura didn't answer right away. She leaned against the table instead, arms crossed, thinking. "Because you don't confuse urgency with importance," she said finally. "And because Ethan underestimates you." That name again. Ethan Cole. The friendly pressure. The smile that calculated outcomes. "He thinks I'm obsolete," I said. "He thinks you're predictable," she corrected. There's a difference. The board prep started exactly on time. Long table. Neutral art. Faces I'd seen in quarterly videos, but never in person. The questions came fast, but not loud. They didn't need volume. They needed permission. "How do you see your role evolving, Michael? Can you adapt to new leadership models? What would you say is your greatest risk factor?" At my age, you can hear what's underneath the question. They weren't asking about strategy. They were asking whether I would apologize for still being there. I answered simply. I didn't sell myself. I explained myself. I spoke about continuity, about knowing when change breaks more than it fixes. I talked about people, not platforms. When one of them smirked slightly, just enough to register, I felt the old instinct rise. Soften it, make them comfortable. Trade dignity for safety. That was my internal choice, right there at the table. Defend my value by shrinking it, or state it plainly and accept the consequences. I chose plainly. When it was over, there were nods. No applause. No verdict. Just polite closure. The kind that can go either way. Laura caught up with me in the hallway afterward. She didn't ask how it went. She didn't need to. You didn't bend, she said. I didn't break either, I replied. A small smile flickered, then disappeared. That matters. We walked in silence for a few steps. Then she stopped. There's something else, she said. That tone again. Not danger. Wait. Ethan is pushing for a phase transition, she continued. A 6-month overlap. You stay, but you're sidelined. Knowledge transfer. No authority. I understood immediately. Keep me visible enough to neutralize. Invisible enough to erase. And you? I asked. I haven't agreed, she said. But the pressure is real. I looked at her, not as a CEO now, but as a woman trying to hold a line without showing strain. This was my second choice of the episode, and it surprised me how personal it felt. Protect myself by stepping back, or risk staying visible for someone who might not be able to protect me later. If that's the path, I said carefully, I'd rather leave now. She studied me, then nodded once. I thought you'd say that. We stood there, two professionals, no promises hanging between us. Just clarity. Later that afternoon, Ethan passed my desk. Heard the prep went well, he said. For now. I smiled, the polite kind. The kind that doesn't invite conversation. That evening, as I shut down my computer, Laura sent a short message. We need to talk tomorrow. About next steps. Not a threat. Not a guarantee. As I walked out into the cold Chicago air, I felt something shift. Not relief, not fear, but awareness. This wasn't just about keeping a job anymore. It was about choosing how visible I was willing to be in the last chapter of my working life, and whether quiet respect was enough, or if I was ready to risk more than comfort to earn it. The first real threat didn't arrive in a meeting. It arrived in my inbox at 6:12 a.m., written in polite language and copied to too many people to be an accident. At 59, you stop fearing loud confrontations. What unsettles you are emails that sound reasonable while quietly removing the ground beneath your feet. The subject line read, Transition Planning, Knowledge Continuity. I stood in my kitchen, coffee cooling in my hand, rereading it while the city outside my window slowly woke up. You're watching this, so I'll be honest with you. I knew exactly what it meant. This wasn't about continuity. It was about control. By the time I reached the office, the message had already done its work. People smiled a little longer. Conversations ended a little faster when I approached. I hadn't been fired, demoted, or reassigned yet. Instead, I was being framed. The experienced professional who would support the transition. The older man who would stay just long enough to be replaced gracefully. It's a dangerous place to be, because if you accept it quietly, everyone thanks you for disappearing. Laura hadn't replied to the email. That mattered. It meant she was thinking or being cornered. I spent the morning doing my job with deliberate precision. No defensiveness. No speeches. Just competence. That's the thing people forget about men my age. We've learned how to wait without looking weak. Still, by noon, the tension had settled behind my eyes like pressure before a storm. Ethan didn't wait long. He stopped by my desk mid-afternoon, leaning casually against the partition like we were equals sharing a harmless update. Saw the transition note, he said. Smart move. Keeps everyone comfortable. Comfortable for whom? I wondered. Out loud, I said, it depends what you think the goal is. He smiled. Stability, predictability, and relevance. I asked. His smile thinned. Relevance evolves. There it was, the quiet dismissal. Not cruel. Efficient. He lowered his voice. This way, you leave with respect. That sentence landed harder than any insult, because it carried a choice inside it. Accept the role they've designed for you, or become difficult at an age when difficulty is rarely forgiven. That was my internal fork in the road, and I felt it settle into place with unsettling clarity. Do I protect my reputation by cooperating, or protect my dignity by resisting, knowing it might cost me everything? I'm not planning to leave yet, I said evenly. Ethan straightened. Plans change. He walked away before I could respond, confident the system would do the rest. For the first time in weeks, anger pushed past restraint. Not explosive anger, something colder. A realization that staying silent would slowly erase me in ways no exit interview could fix. I didn't go home right away. I walked along the river, the same path I'd taken hundreds of times over the years, always assuming tomorrow would look more or less like today. That illusion was gone now. At my age, you don't get many chances to redefine yourself. And when one appears, it rarely comes without risk. My phone buzzed. Laura, can you come by? Not the office. We met at a quiet cafe a few blocks away, the kind of place no one from a company would accidentally choose. She looked different there, less armored, more human. Tired, but focused. They're accelerating, she said without preamble. The board likes Ethan's plan. It looks clean. It erases me, I replied. Yes, she said. Gradually. Professionally. I studied her face, searching for reassurance she didn't offer. Are you going to stop it? She exhaled slowly. I tried. But pushing back too hard right now gives them leverage against both of us. There it was. The risk had a shape now. If I fought, I might lose. If she fought with me, she might lose too. That shifted everything. I won't be sidelined, I said. Not at this stage of my life. She met my eyes. Then we need to change the narrative. How? By making it clear that removing you creates a problem they don't want, she said. Not emotionally. Operationally. That was the moment I realized this wasn't just about saving my role. It was about deciding whether I trusted her judgment, or whether I walked away before being turned into an example. There's something you should know, Laura added quietly. Ethan's positioning you as resistant. Difficult. I almost laughed. That's convenient. It is, she said. And dangerous. We sat in silence, the weight of unspoken consequences pressing in. No promises passed between us. No comforting lines. Just the understanding that whatever came next would test more than strategy. It would test character. That night, I drafted my resignation letter. Not because I planned to send it, but because I needed to know I could. At 59, autonomy is a form of courage. I reread it once, then closed the file without saving. The next morning, I made my decision. I requested a full operational review, publicly, cross-departmental, transparent, the kind of move that either reasserts your value or paints a target on your back. There's no middle ground. Laura didn't stop me. That mattered too. By the end of the day, the office felt different. Taut, watchful. I caught Ethan's gaze across the floor. No smile this time. Just calculation. As I packed up to leave, my phone buzzed again. Laura, be careful tomorrow. If this turns, it turns fast. I stepped outside into the cold evening, my breath visible in the air. For the first time since all this began, fear wasn't the dominant feeling. Resolve was. The real danger was no longer losing my position. It was losing the right to define myself at the very moment it mattered most. And I had just made sure that, one way or another, that choice would be mine. The silence was the first sign that something had gone wrong. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that follows a decision everyone knows about, but no one wants to explain. When I walked into the office that morning, conversations didn't stop. They curved away from me. At 59, you don't need a memo to know when you've crossed an invisible line. You feel it in the way people suddenly become polite, careful, as if you're already a memory. The operational review I'd requested was moving forward, but not the way I'd expected. Meetings were rescheduled without me. Documents arrived late, stripped of context. I hadn't been removed from my role, but I'd been distanced from it, which is often worse. This was the phase where doubt does the heavy lifting for your opponents. I sat at my desk, hands folded, and realized this was the moment many men quietly accept the ending written for them. You're watching this, so let me be clear. Distance can feel like peace if you mistake it for dignity. Laura hadn't spoken to me since my request went public. No messages. No glances across the floor. If episode 3 was about pressure, this was about absence. The absence forced a harder internal question than any confrontation could have. Was I fighting for the right reason, or just fighting because I didn't know how to stop? Around noon, HR asked me to step into a small conference room. No hostility. Neutral tone. A manila folder placed carefully on the table. The kind of meeting that never makes headlines, but ends careers quietly. This is standard, the representative said. We just want to understand your intentions. My intentions. As if they were something suspicious. I answered calmly. Explained my review wasn't resistance, it was responsibility. They nodded, took notes, thanked me for my time. No outcome stated. That was the point. When I left the room, I checked my phone. Nothing from Laura. That absence landed harder than the HR meeting. For the first time, doubt crept in, not about the company, but about her. Had I misread the situation? Had I assumed alignment where there was only temporary convenience? That evening, I didn't go home. I walked until the buildings thinned and the noise softened. At my age, distance helps thoughts line up. I replayed every interaction, every look, every moment where silence might have meant calculation instead of constraint. Here was my internal choice for this episode, sharper than the rest. Do I pull back to protect myself or trust someone who hasn't given me reassurance when I need it most? The next day answered me, partially. Laura called late afternoon. I can't talk long, she said. Her voice was controlled, but there was strain underneath. Meet me after work. Not downtown. We met at a small park near the river, quiet enough to avoid attention. She stood when she saw me, hands in her coat pockets, watching the water like it might offer advice. I should have said something sooner, she began. But timing matters. I'm being sidelined, I said. Not accusing. Stating a fact. Yes, she said. Because if they see us aligned right now, they'll move faster. That was the hidden motive I hadn't been allowed to see. Distance as protection. It made sense and still hurt. They're testing whether you'll retreat on your own, she continued. If you do, they don't have to force anything. And if I don't, she turned to me then they'll escalate. Publicly. There it was. The cost, finally named. Staying meant becoming a focal point. Leaving meant confirming their story. I won't be humiliated, I said quietly. I know, she replied. That's why I'm asking you to hold a little longer. Hold. Not fight. Not surrender. Hold. At 59, patience isn't passive, it's strategic. Still, trust is a currency that depletes quickly under silence. I studied her face, looking for certainty I knew she couldn't give. If this fails, I said, I walk alone. She didn't argue. Yes. We stood there, two people who understood the cost of alignment without guarantees. No promises were made. None were needed. The following week was the longest of my career. Every meeting felt provisional. Every email sounded final. Ethan avoided me completely now, which told me more than confrontation ever could. He was waiting for momentum to finish the work. On Friday afternoon, I cleared my desk, not in defeat, but preparation. If this ended, it would end cleanly. As I shut down my computer, a message came through from Laura. Monday changes everything. Don't disappear before then. I stepped outside into the early evening, the city glowing in that quiet way it does before night fully arrives. For the first time since this began, I felt the weight of what I might lose and what I might gain if I stayed steady. The emotional shift wasn't hope. It was something harder and more honest, acceptance of risk, of uncertainty, of the fact that dignity sometimes requires standing still while the world decides whether you're worth the trouble. And as I walked home, I understood that the distance between us, the silence, the restraint, wasn't the end of the story. It was the space where a final decision was forming, one that would either close this chapter for good or open it in a way none of us could control. The last decision didn't come with drama. No raised voices. No sudden emails. It came the way most real endings do, quietly, on a Monday morning, when the building felt lighter than it should have. At 59, you learn that silence can mean two things, surrender or resolution. As I walked toward the boardroom, I didn't know which one I was about to meet, but I knew something was about to be finished. And something else, whether I liked it or not, was about to begin. You're watching this, so let me say it plainly. By this point, the job itself mattered less than how it would all close. Titles fade. Offices get reassigned. What stays with you is whether you walked out diminished or intact. I straightened my jacket, not for confidence, but for respect, my own. The boardroom was full when I arrived. Not crowded. Full in that intentional way, where every chair is occupied by someone who believes their presence matters. Laura sat at the far end of the table, composed as ever. Ethan was 2 seats to her right, hands folded, expression neutral. If this were a courtroom, he would have been the kind of man who already liked the verdict. The meeting began without ceremony. Numbers. Slides. Language polished enough to sound inevitable. The operational review I triggered was summarized efficiently. Risks. Redundancies. Future alignment. Then came the part everyone had been waiting for. How do we proceed? One of the directors asked. That was my cue. Not because I was invited to speak, but because silence at moments like this becomes permission. This was my final internal choice, clearer than all the others. Do I let them define my exit, or do I define my presence, even if it cost me? I stood. Not quickly. Not defiantly. Just enough to remind them I was still there. I won't take much time, I said. But I want to be clear. I spoke about continuity, not as an abstract benefit, but as lived experience. I named problems that hadn't made it into the slides. Not dramatically. Precisely. I didn't criticize Ethan. I didn't defend myself. I framed value as responsibility, not entitlement. When I finished, I sat back down. No flourish. The room was quiet again. This time, it felt earned. Laura was the one who broke it. We're not discussing whether Michael stays, she said evenly. We're discussing how the company handles experience without turning it into liability. It was a risk. I knew that. So did everyone else. Ethan leaned forward. With respect, he said, we can't build strategy around individuals. Laura met his gaze. No, she replied. But we can build it around outcomes. And his track record produces them. The vote wasn't unanimous. Nothing important ever is. But it was enough. Enough to stop the phased erasure. Enough to reset the narrative. I wasn't promoted. I wasn't saved. I was repositioned, publicly, clearly, without apology. After the meeting, people filtered out with the kind of politeness that follows a conclusion. Ethan didn't speak to me. He didn't have to. The shift was done. Laura caught up with me in the hallway. No assistants. No observers. You didn't make it easy, she said. I didn't want to make it comfortable, I replied. She nodded. That's why it worked. We didn't linger. This wasn't a moment for celebration. It was a moment for honesty. This won't be smooth, she added. There will be pressure. Still. I know, I said. And when it stops making sense, I'll step away. That was the difference now. The door wasn't being closed on me. I was choosing when to leave it. That evening, I walked home instead of taking a car. The city looked the same, busy and different, but I felt lighter inside it. Not triumphant. Settled. There's a particular peace that comes when you stop negotiating your worth and start honoring it. I thought about Laura, not as a CEO now, but as a woman who had chosen risk over convenience. We hadn't promised each other anything. We didn't need to. Mutual respect, I've learned, can be more grounding than certainty. Later that night, she sent a message. Not about work. Just a line. Thank you for standing your ground today. I stared at it for a long moment before replying. Then I typed back what felt true. Thank you for letting me. That was it. No grand future outlined. No guarantees. Just two adults who understood that trust is built through decisions, not declarations. If you're still watching, here's what I want you to take from this. The real victory wasn't keeping a role or winning an argument. It was walking through the last test of my working life without shrinking. At 59, that matters more than any title ever could. I don't know how long I'll stay. I don't know how this story will look from the outside a year from now. But I do know this. When the moment came to choose between comfort and clarity, I chose clarity. And that choice, quiet, uncelebrated, and deeply personal, left me with something I hadn't expected at this stage of life. Not certainty, not romance, but a calm acceptance that whatever comes next, I'll meet it as myself, not as someone else's version of who I should be.